There are so many of us committed to improving the lives of the youth in our communities. The In It for Youth podcast is a place for us to come together, from professionals who work with and serve youth to those that champion issues affecting children, to community advocates and stakeholders, and insightful young minds too. The In It for Youth podcast is a tapestry of voices united by a dedication to youth well-being and empowering the young generations of today and tomorrow. I'm your host, Jamie Gale, and I'm so glad you've joined me on this team that is in it for youth. Hello and welcome back to the show. As I mentioned in a previous episode, this season is all about talking with my colleagues and experts in the field that are running businesses and working hard to improve the lives of the youth in their communities. And I'm really excited to introduce you to my guest today. She is a friend, a colleague, a kick-ass business owner. She is just a compassionate educator, making a huge impact in now thousands and thousands of kids' lives throughout the Midwest and around the country. You're going to love her. Her name is Erin Bracco, and she is the co-founder of both Brain to Belly Kids Yoga, which is known as BBKY, and Meet Me in Child's Pose, which is our project that we have together. And she recently acquired another Chicago yoga business called Youth Alliance Yoga. Erin is an Illinois professional educator and a registered children's yoga teacher. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in both elementary education and special education from Peabody College at Vanderbilt University. She holds countless certifications in the field of education and yoga and has a strong passion for child development and nervous system education, which is evident in her teaching style and curriculum and the way she moves through the world. Congratulations on all of your impact on youth well-being, Erin, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jamie. I love listening to podcasts. And so it's always funny to hear when people intro the other person and then they get so jazzed. Oh my gosh, that's so sweet of you. I guess those are the things I did.
Isn't it fun?
It is fun. Yeah.
I love it. Well, you deserve all of that jazz. So, all right, let's start with your current work with youth. So can you fill us in on your company? What is the overview of what BBKY is and what it does?
Sure. So we are about to head into our 10th year at BBKY, which is wild, which also correlates to our relationship because we have now known each other for a decade, which is wild as well. I am based in Chicago, and BBKY, we have evolved over the years from originally called Buddha Belly Kids Yoga. So when I started, I was teaching kindergarten and doing a lot of movement and mindfulness in my classroom, trying to make sure my own practice was strong so that I could have my cup filled in order to be the best teacher and human I could be for my little ones. And I found a huge difference in the way my kiddos walked through their world and their spaces in that 5 to 6 year old range, which is a huge, big year. Kindergarten is a huge year for both the kids and their parents. And I just found so much more ease throughout the year in kind of everything we did when we came from a more mindful space. So that turned into an after school club that turned into birthday parties and some summer camps. And then after that 2016-2017 school year, I left the classroom and decided to do this full time. So I went to 4 or 5 schools or locations per day. Every day, I worked a ton and quickly realized I either needed to figure out what was sustainable for me or hire people on. And I went that route, and we decided to bring some other teachers in here and there. And then it has turned into this pretty large company, small business, but large in the sense that we're probably one of the main folks doing kids yoga in the Chicagoland area now in 2025.
It's so exciting. It's been really amazing to be along the journey of this company going from idea to just booming business. So that's really great. So tell us a little bit about, for people that don't live in Chicago, where is BBKY these days and what types of classes are you offering on a regular basis?
Sure. So we are totally mobile, which I think has its pros and cons. Definitely helped in the pandemic because we didn't have the overhead of having to rent a space and things like that. So we go into schools, libraries, park district programming. Interestingly enough, while we are in several yoga studios, those are always the most difficult, which I know you know this, to sustain a program there. Everyone says, oh yeah, we want yoga at our yoga studio, but it's so adult focused that it's hard to get people to actually come. The best option is to go where there's already children. So everything from preschool daycare centers to elementary, middle school, and some high school programming. And then we do a lot of unique collaborations. So for example, we used to work with like a climbing gym, and they would have like a summer camp program, and then we'd pop in and do yoga during certain portions of their day. So summer is mostly popping into other existing camps. And then school year is super focused on programming around the schools.
And so the schools contract with BBKY to bring in an instructor on a regular basis, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was on your website, which I don't do often since we just normally communicate on text and phone, but I saw that your company's tagline is yoga for students created by educators, movement and mindfulness through a nervous system lens. So yoga for students created by educators, movement and mindfulness through a nervous system lens. Can you break that down for someone who's listening, who cares a ton about kids, works with kids in some ways, but is in a different industry? Like, what do the pieces of that mean? And how does that come together in BBKY?
Absolutely. So yoga for kids, we obviously work with what I say toddlers to teenagers. So our primary focus is movement and mindfulness for that age group. Oftentimes we have classes for families, and so then the adults are coming in as well, but everything is geared towards the, 0 to 18 range. I find that the created by educators piece is super important as an educator. This is my life. This is my passion. I have been in schools for decades, and there's something about going into schools and understanding what it's like to be the classroom teacher or the substitute or the paraprofessional or a leader of a school, and understand the needs of the school. And obviously every school is different, but I feel very strongly as an educator, I can relate to what they're doing in the classroom, and it tends to be a little more gentle of a conversation, and their shoulders kind of drop a little bit when I'm like, I get it. I've literally been in your shoes. And I chose to leave to bring these practices into schools versus, you're exhausted, you're burnt out, all of those things happen. And how can we bring practices to also the educators, the adults in the space, so that they're having a regulated nervous system in the spaces that they're working in?
So can you touch on that regulated nervous system piece? So if somebody's like, oh, okay, I go to yoga class, that's such a core part of what you do. In fact, it was a big part of your rebrand. Can you just sort of break it down into, let's just say layman's terms? Why is kids yoga tying kids yoga to the nervous system lens like so important?
I feel like when I first started this or was telling people like, oh yeah, I teach kids yoga, or I'm going to start bringing yoga to different places where there are children, I got a lot of, oh, that's so cute.
Yes.
And while if you look at a picture, it is really cute.
It's really cute. Yeah.
I would get that a little bit with like, oh, I'm a kindergarten teacher. Oh, that's so cute. Right. But there's a lot of hats that you wear as a guide of little humans, right? Just like parents wear a million different hats. So I think when that phrase started popping in, like, oh, that's so cute, that's so cute, I wanted people to understand that it is important work, right? Like this, what we do is really important. It's not extra. It's not just enrichment. And I think the pandemic shifted that a little bit, because schools used to be like, oh yeah, sure, you can come in as an enrichment. And it was more of an afterthought. And for better or for worse, I think post-pandemic, it's much more of a understanding that this is like really important and needed. And so, with kids, movement is obviously important. Being creative and playful and all the sort of tools and strategies that we use in classes are the essence of what they need at that age. And it is really powerful and empowering for a child to be able to say, I'm feeling X. I can do X and feel differently, or I can, breathe through the anxiety that I feel when I'm about to take a test, or when I go to the doctor and I don't really like getting shots. Like I have these tools that I can use beforehand or during. So it comes from more of a place of helping kids understand that they can be advocates for themselves. They can listen to their bodies. They're the experts of their bodies. And that just because a grown-up is older than them doesn't mean that they're wrong when they say these things. We need to believe kids. I fully believe that like a kid tells you something, you believe them. And these tools and strategies really help kids be able to say like, no, I don't like that. Or This is what I'm telling you I'm feeling. And then in the same mindset that the grownups in the room, they really need to be able to manage all these different nervous systems that are coming into the space, right? That's a huge task. Whether you're a parent of one child or, a counselor or a teacher where you have 25 children in front of you, it's a huge task. And we are a co-regulating species. Like, that is just naturally the human existence. And the more that people of all ages can understand what's going on in their own bodies, honestly, the better off we'll all be.
It also, to kind of add on to that, especially when you bring in an expert like you are, or one of the instructors from one of our companies to come in and bring these tools to the classroom, it does create like a shared language. First, it gives the kids language around this, the examples that you gave about like, I'm feeling this way, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to feel that way, or I'm experiencing this sensation, this feeling, whatever it is. It gives the kids the language. But then when you bring it in community, into a family, into a classroom, into a camp, it creates a shared language. And so that teacher, that educator, whoever it is that's leading the group, now has the language that the kids understand. It just creates sort of a baseline so that there is the language and the tools are shared. And so there's just something really special about doing that, especially in a group of kids, I find. And I know that's similar to the experience that you have as classroom educator and coming in as the kids yoga instructor, which is another cool, really piece of that regulation piece.
Well, and also this wasn't language that we grew up with, right? Like, this is very nuanced in the sense that we as adults have been learning all of this over the last however many years we've been practicing, and then starting to show and share this with kids of all ages. And what's so cool to see is like my nephew, for example, who will be 2. He's not even 2 yet. And at a parent-teacher conference, the teacher was saying to my sister, oh, he is really good at when he's feeling big feelings, he goes to the little cozy corner, does something with a fidget, whatever it is, and comes back. And I'm like, I don't know that most 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds can do that. I already in the last 10 years have seen a shift in children's abilities to regulate themselves than when we first started doing this.
Totally. Yeah, love it. I completely agree. When we're talking about expanding the shared language, if we can bring it into classrooms and teach the kids and the educators this, and that becomes a shared language there, then that is trickling down into home. And so that's just, it's the ripples are wide. And it totally is. All right. So we mentioned earlier how we have a shared project, and that is a kids yoga teacher training called Meet Me in Child's Pose. And I'm really excited to share a little bit more about that with the listeners. Backing out a little bit, you and I both said, we've known each other now for a decade. We've been in the same line of work during this time. It is incredible to have a colleague who, we're not in the same city, but we have a shared passion and shared style. And we always joke like, oh, we could pop in and sub each other's classes very easily. We have a very similar teaching style and approach to it. But we both said we would not create a kids yoga teacher training until we had something to say, something to add to the conversation. There really are a lot of really great kids yoga teacher trainings out there in the industry. And we've both taken many of them, and they're really phenomenal trainings out there. And we didn't want to just make one just to make one. We promised ourselves and each other that we would wait until the time came where we had something new to say, something to add to the conversation, to add our perspective to the broader industry. And when that time came, Meet Me in Child's Pose was born from there. And we've been really lucky to train and work with so many amazing trainees, educators, social workers, parents, guardians, so many community members that are doing incredible work with kids now through yoga and mindfulness too. And so I'm excited to chat a little bit about that. And I think it might be helpful if we gave listeners a look into what a Meet Me in Child's Pose weekend training looks like and feels like before we dig into the topic that we're going to discuss today. So if you want to just kind of start with that and what can someone expect when they come to a Meet Me in Child's Pose weekend?
I love it. Well, one of our main goals when we talked about all of this was that we want people to feel like on Monday they could go do this. And while we've taken all of these amazing trainings where we've learned so many things, sometimes it felt like what was missing was this like practical piece of I can go do this. I really can go do this. And it's not just a list of games or a bunch of fun activities. It's more practical and nuanced in that way. So it's a 2-day training. There is a little bit of pre-work, as we say, ahead of time to get up to that 20 hours of certification. But we come in, we act like kids, we play like kids. We have been very strategic and intentional in how we've laid out the hour by hour and making it feel like the arc of a yoga class. And we talk a lot about the arc of a yoga class in the training and how we're starting the same way because that's how you start in a kid's class, right? So the consistency is there, the structure is there so that you're embodying the way a yoga class is going to feel before you ever bring it to children. There's a lot of playfulness and fun and joy, and there's feelings and hard conversations and big topics, and people get passionate about, whatever the reason is they're there. And the connection, it's amazing from day one or the morning we're there till the evening on the Sunday that we're leaving, like the connections that have been formed, and everyone really feels seen as who they are and why they're there and what they're trying to bring out into the world. And I think we do a really good job of not trying to copy paste teachers, right? Which I always talk about when I'm hiring and with my instructors, I'm not looking to create a million Erin Braccos. I'm looking for you to be a really solid teacher who brings your humanness, your excitement, your whatever thing that lights you up into the room. And I think we do a really good job of helping people stay as their individuals while learning this craft, if you will. There's a little graduation ceremony at the end of it. You get a certificate. We try really hard to keep people connected afterwards and share resources and other learning opportunities as well.
You reminded me that, a big motivation for us starting this was that people could really be ready the next day to teach. And so we always say, come ready to play, leave ready to teach. And part of that is that we do a lot of practice teaching in there because it's just kids take driver's ed, they can watch the videos, they can know all the rules in their mind, think they can go do it. But until you're behind the wheel and actually put on a pedal, you don't really know. And so we do a lot of practice teaching. And I think that helps give people the confidence. We show them the games, we teach them the why, we teach them the how to lead it. We let them feel what it feels like to be the student and the teacher. And they know enough about the why and the how to then go and do it.
They always see a real life class too, one of the days at least, where that's really beneficial because then we're able to in real time digest and dissect what happened in class. And while, you can write the most beautiful plan in the whole wide world, it's never going to go to plan. And so then being able to ask whether it's you, Jamie, teaching the class or me, the trainees can ask questions of okay, well, when this little kid wasn't ready to give back the scarf, why did you do this, or that? Right. Totally. So I think that's really helpful too, is they get real live action to talk about.
And then also behind the curtain. Exactly.
Yep.
All right. So we talked about how we were going to wait till we had something to say to add to the industry with the training. And we got there because of the things that we've seen and learned, both from our previous education experience, but then also for teaching hundreds, if not thousands of kids yoga classes ourselves, and that have really shaped our teaching approach. And one of the pieces of our weekend training that we're going to share on today's episode is what we call our stacking stones. And they build the foundation for our beliefs about teaching kids yoga. And really, actually, it's very applicable to teaching any kids. These are things that we believe about working with children, approaching groups of children, especially, and they could be applied to, many, many, many different industries of our listeners. This is a podcast about youth well-being. And so everybody's in it for youth, literally. This is our perspective. We realize that not everybody shares our perspective, and we'll, take from this what you like. This is something we tell our trainees during the training too, is, you might take one of these things and run with it, and others you can say are not for you. And that's what is beautiful about the way we teach. Like Erin said, we're not creating cookie cutter versions of ourselves, but these are some of our core stacking stones about the way that we approach. And in our playbook that we give to all the trainees, we have a nice little visual that goes along with this, but we'll just have to talk through it in this audio format. So we're just going to go through them. We have 7 stacking stones. I'm going to start with one that I am very passionate about, and that is our stacking stone number 1. And that is that children are capable. This seems like such an obvious thing in concept, but in practice, we see so often that kids kind of sometimes need to be pushed to the edge of their comfort. They might need to be encouraged to try something new. One of the things that we see when we notice educators or instructors or camp counselors leading an activity is that they feel like they need to give a lot of caveats, and they don't want to appear bossy or too in charge. But it is our belief that when you're introducing an activity or a lesson or a new concept to kids, that it's best to explain it in the best expression of what you want the activity to be, and to trust that the kids are going to moderate their involvement then with what feels right to them. Like Erin was saying, like, believe kids know themselves, they know their bodies. And so if we're going to introduce a game or an activity, instead of giving 1,000 different instructions about like, well, and if you don't like this, you can do this. And if you don't like this, you can do this. We encourage instructors, teachers to share the very best expression of the activity, because kids are capable. They are skilled. They are capable. Their brains are literally growing and changing it every day of development. And the more we can get kids to create new grooves in their brain, more that they can try out their new skills, flex those muscles, the more they're going to find their own power. They're going to feel the self-efficacy. And we don't need to water things down for kids just because they're kids. If anything, we should be giving kids challenges that help them grow and stretch their skills. Kids will take the out if you give them the out, especially once you get past that, 6, 7-year-old. Kids start to really worry about or wonder about what the other kids in the room are thinking about them. And so as soon as you say, if you don't want to have a turn, you don't have to have a turn. Or if this feels too hard for you, here's an easier version. And that is important in a lot of adult classes, especially yoga classes, but it is important to give adults, quote, permission to try something easier or to sit something out, because we are so performance driven, and our upbringing was so much about, ignoring our body cues, ignoring our needs. And so we are sometimes too perfectionist as adults. And so if you go to an adult yoga class, it is really important that the instructor gives modifications to make things easier on the body or more gentle or less challenging. But if you give kids that opportunity to sit something out or do something easier, especially once they get past that 6, 7, they're going to take it, because they're going to be, one, nervous to try something new, 2, worried about what other people are going to think, and there's inertia. It's easier to do the easier thing. And so it's our belief that give kids the best expression. We're all going to try this. And then as the instructor, it's our responsibility to watch how the activity is going in the room, see who is showing us nonverbal cues. There will be the kids who protest right away, but then there are some who won't. And so it's our responsibility as the adult in the room to watch their nonverbal cues and go up to them and offer them things that we think are appropriate, and trust ourselves to react in the moment to what is needed. So this is our push to give the description of the activity without caveat, without outs, and here's how you make this easier or less embarrassing or whatever it is, and trust that kids will rise to the occasion, and that trust that you as the instructor will be able to adapt in the moment. Did I miss anything on that?
No, I had said before, I was like, Jamie, you have to start with this one, because when we've done trainings together, I can feel it in you. And it's usually after, people ask, I feel like instructors or trainees, they ask like, well, what if a kid doesn't want to do X, Y, and Z? If you've already established the space where they feel seen and heard, then they are going to back off when they want to back off, or they're going to try more when they want to try more, right? As versus like you having to say every single time, you can pass if you want to pass, right? Right? Like we've already established the norms and expectations of a class that if you need to opt out, you can, but we don't have to say it every single time that we're introducing something new, because especially like you mentioned, those like tween teenage, they are out before you even said any other words other than if you want an out, take an out.
Totally. And then you're going to have the kids who believe, like, quote, the sporty kids who are going to do the physical challenges more, or, the kids categorize themselves before they even have a chance to try some things. And so they might think, oh, this is not something I was told I wasn't sporty. I was told I wasn't creative, whatever it is. And so they're going to be less likely to try the activity. And so just really pushing yourself as an instructor to state it as expecting that the kids are going to rise to the occasion, and then adapting from there.
Yep.
All right. Our second stacking stone is play, play, play. And Erin, why don't you take this one away?
Okay. So this is probably something I get really fiery about as an educator and a former classroom teacher, where the expectation in education is not always developmentally appropriate, right? We as a society, as a country, have certain standards and things that, like, you must be reading at this level by this time. And a lot of typical schools, traditional schools, you follow that and you just sort of keep trying to do that without necessarily thinking about what is best for kids. I know every teacher has their best intentions out there, but what was hard for me as a classroom teacher was the expectation that these 5 and 6 year olds, who in my particular case were coming in not knowing the letters in their names, English as a second language, right? Families whose parents are working multiple jobs and siblings are the ones getting them up in the morning, right? Things like that. And we were basically told, like, you can't have playtime. Sure, there was recess and there were like little opportunities for that type of experience, but that was really, really hard for me. And so I kind of just closed the door and did what I knew was best for kids. Human beings are meant to move, and we very much are playful beings. That's something that I think as you get older, grown-ups forget. It's a big reason why our training is successful, because for 2 days, you as a adult human are remembering what it's like to be a kid and what it's like to play and create and imagine, and probably tapping into parts of your brain that you haven't used recently, or at least don't use as often, especially if you have more of a corporate job or don't often interact with kids. So this element of play is huge, because a lot of times it's been taken out of the school day, especially if we're coming in as an after school class or even during the school day. It's like this beautiful, precious time for kids to just be. It gives kids an opportunity to use different parts of their brain, to be creative, to be imaginative, to connect with their peers in other ways than, when you're doing a group project about something. So this is, I think, where people say, oh, it's so cute, right? Because it looks really cute when kids are using tongs to pick up pom-poms or whatever it is. But I always remind teachers, family members, whoever it is, especially in the younger classes, like toddler preschool classes, any activity that we're doing that looks like play, I try to say, like, here are the benefits, right? Here's the why. This is what it's actually doing, even if it looks super cute and simple. The big thing with play is just giving this opportunity for kids to explore and not necessarily have certain standards that they're supposed to meet like they are throughout the day in a more traditional school setting.
And I think that ripples out into our training and then into the classes that, we teach, our instructor teach, but then also our trainees teach, is that because play is so embraced in the way that we approach this, that is the win in and of itself. It's interesting. Sometimes we see instructors who have a quote fun game, but they want kids to be following the rules so closely and quietly and take their turns without interrupting each other and not leave their seat and not make too much noise, whatever it is, that they have sucked the play out of the quote fun activity. And so that is one thing that I think that you and I work really hard at in our classes and in the people that we teach how to teach kids yoga, is as the adult who's leading the activity, being also prepared for what comes along with play. And that is sometimes noise and a little bit of disorder. And it's one of the reasons that we practice the calming technique, so we can go from a higher energy, playful moment to a lower energy relaxation moment when the time is right for that. The stacking stones, if you just think about them from afar, they make sense. But then when you think about, okay, what does this actually mean? It means that in a class of 8 or 9 year olds, that if you're going to let them play a tag game where they're freezing in poses, there's going to be noise and a little bit of chaos and everything like that. And so just making sure that we don't suck the playfulness out of the quote play and allowing kids to be kids. And so I think that's one of the things that we work really hard to do in our classes and to teach people how to do. And it's interesting because when you model that for the adults, they find the play more easily too, so it's really great.
Yes.
Well, to tie all of these topics already that we've talked about between the adult and the kids in the room, our next stacking stone is right on track with this. And that stacking stone is that an escalated adult cannot de-escalate a child. So I'll say it again. An escalated adult cannot de-escalate a child. And so a lot of times, as a parent or an educator or a camp counselor or a grandparent or an aunt, you see a kid and they're escalated, and it might be in a negative direction. It might be, that they're experiencing an emotion we call a negative, right? Like they're frustrated, they're angry, they're super mad, they're overheated, they're whatever it is. And that's creating a behavior where they're acting out, they're yelling, they're screaming, they're kicking, they're knocking over furniture, whatever it is. And as the adult, that creates our emotions in us, right? It's a natural thing that we're going to have our own emotions that are probably going to mirror those of the kid. But if we come at the child escalated ourselves, we're never going to be able to help them de-escalate, right? Screaming begets screaming. It's like when you're screaming at the kid, like, calm down, but really like you're not calm either. And so really we focus on the importance of first tending to your own inner world at yourself as an adult before you approach the kid. So to work on de-escalating yourself before you approach the child. What does that look like in a kid's yoga class? You've created this plan, you've gotten your supplies, you wrote it out, all of these things, and you've got, Sally there, and Sally's having a day and she is just not going to participate in whatever it is. And not just that, she's also going to be disruptive and maybe a little bit unsafe. And so you have to deal with it. And not only are you dealing with it, but you're also kind of getting annoyed, and you're hot and you're tired and you've spent so much time, and you realize that the parents are coming to pick up in a few minutes. And so you're experiencing your own inner world in this moment, and you just want Sally to stop. Obviously as a parent, it's the same type of deal, right? Like your parents experience this all the time where have their own plan in their own mind, and their kid is getting in the way of it. And so it's recognizing that, back to the yoga example, like we have to take a moment and we have to deal with our own inner world. What tools or strategies do we need to use? These same yoga and mindfulness strategies, the same nervous system regulation strategies that Erin was mentioning before, to work on de-escalating ourselves first. And then we can go and approach the child from a regulated space, and we can help the child then use those tools. Our own brains are not in fight or flight at that moment. And so that we're able to make decisions about what actually has to happen in that moment, and then take that a next step and help the child de-escalate as well, or to make the best of the situation as it is.
You said the word mirror. We have what are called mirror neurons in our body and our brain. And if you think about when you have a little baby in front of you and they're crying and fussy and whatnot, and then you just start smiling and cooing and all of that, they start to mirror that exact thing that you're doing. So I think it's even helpful just like having that awareness that, oh, I can be a mirror. I am a mirror to these kids, and it could look one or two ways in the mirror. What do I want the mirror to look like? And then also this concept of like reminding ourselves, especially in the moment, that these children aren't giving us a hard time, they're having a hard time, right? And those are little tips and tricks that help me in the moment when I'm getting escalated, like they're having a hard time, they're having a hard time, they're having a hard time, to slow down. And then finding ways, because everyone's different, what is the strategy for you that works? And maybe it's the same one every time, or maybe it changes and you need to make sure you have a bunch in your toolbox. Making sure that you are starting to put actual strategies into play when you notice yourself escalated, so that then you can be more helpful to the child.
Totally. All right. The next stacking stone is number 4, and that is, when you're teaching, use a structure, not a script. And so why don't you explain kind of what we mean by that?
Yes. So in our training, we give trainees a good amount of time to practice lesson planning. We talked about how we give them time to practice teach. And part of that experience is also like, okay, let's sit down and write out what it is I'm going to do for this activity or for this whole class or whatever it is. And as a former classroom teacher, the amount of lesson plans I've written in my life is infinity, right? And I remember being in undergrad, and that was a huge piece of my learning experience, was like we wrote these very detailed lesson plans that were pages and pages and pages. And then you get into the classroom and you're not necessarily doing anything off of those pages and pages and pages. But the intention behind that was to get your mind working and start to think about all the different types of scenarios that might happen, and then throw it away, right? So in our training, we talk a lot about a very specific structure that we find to be most helpful from our experience, but trying not to worry so much about like all the nitty gritty of it, and knowing that you're going to have this plan and it's probably beautiful. And 99% of the time, you're going to go off script. And while it can be helpful to have that little script right next to you, it also can be a crutch. And that sometimes the physical act of like scrunching up the paper and throwing it away helps you to let go a little bit of what you're expecting to happen in the class. And at the end of the class, reflecting on like, were they safe? Did they feel seen? Did it look like maybe they were having some fun? Was there a connection that was made or a really cool conversation that was had? Like that's what makes the class successful. Not that I checked off all the boxes of what I had planned. And you and I talk about this all the time about like, I think what makes us very strong yoga teachers, but also like strong humans that work with kids is that we have figured out how to be spontaneous in our teaching. That's honestly what I think one of our big messages is. You do all the things, you learn all the things, you have all the knowledge, all the things like that. But in the moment, how can you spontaneously teach? And that comes from consistency, routine, understanding what's happening in the room with the kids, understanding children development as a whole, and then individually who is actually showing up in your room and not following this very beautiful lesson plan that you've worked hours on, right? Kids yoga is a huge trial in just letting go, right? That's yoga in general, right? It's just like, how can we let go? The more you can put that to the side and just see what's in front of you, the more successful your classes will be.
Totally. And, the other quote script that I think we need to let go of is like what is expected of us from maybe like, let's say the parents are dropping the kids off and really thinking about, okay, what is our actual goal with this class? The goal is to give kids, I always say like a positive yoga experience. You show up to week 6 of a series of 10. And for the last 3 weeks, the kids have just begged to play the same game, the same yoga game. I mean, they are doing yoga. It is the same game over and over. And you're like, oh gosh, how is this going to look to the parents if we play this game again? Or I had another idea planned and, the kids are begging. And it's sometimes that moment where you have to say like, they are begging for a yoga game. Why on earth would I say no to this? They have a positive feeling about a yoga activity. You're exposing them to yoga. Could you mix it up in the moment to try to bring in whatever new skills that you were hoping to bring in with the new activity? Sure, I'm sure you can. But responding in that moment, what's the alternative? Dismissing their begging and saying, no, we're not going to play that today. Now you've got a group of 12 dejected kids that just wanted to do this other yoga game. And so I think that that's the piece of being able to respond in the moment, like you mentioned, in a way that keeps you moving closer to your goal, which as a kids yoga teacher is giving kids a positive, connected kids yoga experience so that they know that the mat is a place that they want to come back to and that they can keep building on these skills as they get older. And then those little kid skills turn into teenage skills, turn into adult skills, and voila, magic.
Well, and I think you probably find this too with like preschools or locations, right? And the teachers or the directors send an email like, oh, so-and-so like keeps doing the same thing, or like some sort of feedback about the class, which I am always open to. And then I usually go and observe the class and either give the teacher feedback or assess what's going on. And a lot of times it's like every single child was engaged. So you, the grown-up, might be like bored of that song, but literally every child was doing it. So it is a lot of shifting the mindset of the other adults in the space too. And your mindset of, oh gosh, someone's going to be peeking in the room and we look like we're sleeping or we look like we're running around like chickens with our heads cut off and all of that. So yeah, it's a lot of letting go of what other people think it's supposed to look like too.
Totally. All right. The next stacking stone is number 5. I do, we do, you do. So do you want to break down kind of how that fits into our training and how we think that should fit into teaching?
Absolutely. Okay. So this concept of I do, we do, you do is all about modeling. So to get us to that best version activity, this is like a very tangible 3-part series, if you will, of how we can do that. So the I do part is the teacher modeling what the task is, what the activity is, what the yoga pose looks like, whatever that is. So let's say we're going to do downward dog. So I'm showing what downward dog looks like. And while I'm showing downward dog, in theory, everybody's watching. With kids, they're going to pop in and out, and that's fine. It's not like a super strict, no, everybody don't do that. Granted, if we're doing something that's a little more challenging or maybe has a little bit more safety elements to it, like partner yoga, for example, that's where, Jamie, you and I are always like, okay, everybody watch, first watch, so that we're making sure that you're understanding the safety aspect to it. So once I've modeled activity, song, whatever it is, then we as a group are going to do it together. There's connection being built there. There's community being built there. If somebody's a little more hesitant and they're watching their friend get really into it, that can motivate them to participate in whatever way. And then some version of you do, meaning, hey, try this on your own or teach someone else this, right? Because that's when the skills really set in, is when you can teach somebody else what it is that you've learned. You've become the quote expert on that. We do this with our trainees as well. So we'll model activities, songs, experiences. Then as a group, they're going to do them and then they're going to practice teach. So that I do, we do, you do is throughout the whole training as well. And the you do part, kids get so excited to share what they know. So maybe that you do comes just like their parent tells you the next week, oh my gosh, all weekend long, I was learning about this yoga pose because my kiddo was, sharing that they have this beautiful down dog and they want to teach it to me. So that is kind of like a 3-step process to really help kids hone in and be able to start transferring skills outside of the space. It's amazing and wonderful for a kid to know how to do candle breath when we're in yoga class. But the point is that they can do candle breath when they're having really big feelings at the grocery store. So that's sort of our 3-part series of how to get kids to really transfer skills into real life and off the mat.
All right. The next stacking stone is number 6, try it on. And so this ties really closely into number 1 of the children are capable, but we encourage kids to give something a try, detach from outcome. The nice thing about a kids yoga class is that there's no grade. There's no winning. There's no perfect score. It's not for performance. It's for the experience. And so we believe that we should encourage kids to try something. They might be hesitant to try it. They might want to watch once or twice, but we eventually do circle back and encourage kids to try something out. It's the opposite of an opt-out that we were mentioning in number 1. It's instead of letting everybody pass, like you mentioned in the past, like if you say you can pass if you don't want to turn to start, they're going to pass because doing new things feels scary. It can create the same emotions and sensations inside of us to try something new as to do something that is risky. And so we believe that encouraging kids to give something a try, while it might create some nervousness in them, that helping them push past that, it will show them the range of their skills. And a lot of times kids think that they're not going to like something. Adults think they're not going to like something. And so we ourselves are like, oh, I don't like that. I've never done it. I don't know, But really, when we do try something new, we could find things that we enjoy that we can feel confident in. And so we do believe that when you're teaching a kids yoga class, that we do encourage kids to try it out. Again, being sensitive in the moment, watching for any nonverbal cues that they're really in distress about something, remembering who really was not up for a turn one time, and then the next time encouraging them or modifying the activity directly for them so that they can feel comfortable taking a step towards it. But really, we do encourage everybody to give something a try. That often means, like Erin was mentioning, having the adults in the room give it a try. In our trainings, the same thing. Sometimes we need to nudge the trainees to give something a try, obviously as is safe for their bodies and everything like that. But assuming that it is, we do encourage our trainees to give something a try, and they find their own growth edge there as well. A lot of times kids say, do we have to, right? Like, do we have to do it? And we usually just respond, give it a try. So we're not forcing them. We're not making them. Obviously, if they're really not going to do it, they're really not going to do it. We're going to move on in every sense of the word. But, a lot of times if a kid says, do I have to do it? We say, give it a try. And so we see if they are willing to take that next step. All right. And the last one, which is super, super, super important, is number 7. And that is know your scope of practice. So Erin, what do we mean when we say this when we're in a kids yoga teacher training, and how does this apply to teaching?
Okay. So when you are teaching kids yoga, you are a kids yoga teacher. As simple as that. Yes, whenever you're working with children, you are wearing a million hats, inevitably. Somebody's going to get a scrape and you need to get a Band-Aid. You've now become the nurse, right? but you are there first and foremost to be their kids' yoga teacher. You might also be a classroom teacher, or you might also be a therapist or a social worker or some other role that is also important, but it is not your job to be those things when you're teaching kids yoga. And that is really hard for adult yoga teachers as well. I don't teach adult often, but I do teach adult classes in some format. And like the biggest thing with my colleagues in that world is that people will come up and be like, so my knee, right? Like I have this like little tweak in my knee, and they're expecting you to have sort of some sort of magical answer because you are a yoga teacher. And the answer is, have you checked with your doctor? Or you're having a bad day and you come in and like, oh, I'm just like really struggling with XYZ. Do you need any resources for a therapist, right? Like it is not our job to be anything other than a kids yoga teacher. There are ways that maybe you are a therapist and you're doing group therapy and you're doing yoga within your group therapy, and then you're wearing your therapist hat in a different way. But we're not here to be everything to everyone. We're just here to give, as you keep saying, Jamie, this positive yoga experience, this experience where they want to keep coming back. And hopefully in 10 years from now, they're choosing to go to an adult yoga class and feeling the same positive experience from when they were kids. That's the hardest part. That yes, there is so much social emotional learning that comes in the yoga class. There's so much big feelings and mindfulness and all these like very big topics that we are exploring in a kids yoga class. And you're just a kids yoga teacher. That's okay. You get to be this like fun, playful adult in their lives that perhaps they don't have somebody that they feel they can just be super creative and themselves around, right? And like that is enough. You don't need to try to be more than that.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And, everything from the big things that you were talking about, for example, in the community that I live, there was just a really tragic school shooting. And so having this discussion with instructors who are going into schools, right? We're going into schools, we're talking with kids. Kids may share with us some very serious reactions, some really serious things. And while we are compassionate educators, we love children, we love working with children, we might have a background in, like you were mentioning, in therapy. We might have from our own experience in therapy or as a therapist. But if we are there to bring kids yoga, that it's finding that delicate balance to honor and see what the kid is saying and then move through it and return to the kids yoga experience, because that is what we are there to do. So it's everything like you are mentioning, like, yeah, an adult might come up and say, I'm struggling with this. A kid might just blurt something out and share it. And so we might feel like, oh gosh, we don't want to ignore it. And we could stop and have a big discussion about feelings and how do we handle hard things. But like that is outside of the scope of what we are there to do. That example was very heavy, but even down to the simple things, when we're coming in as a kids yoga teacher to an existing classroom, like of course the rules of the classroom still apply, but it's not our job in the moment as the kids yoga instructor to teach kids how to sit quietly, like I mentioned before, take turns perfectly, all of these things, no math exactly. Like if a kid counts something wrong or they jump up out of turn, like that's not our responsibility. We're not there. We could spend the entire class on turn taking and waiting patiently and all of those things, but that's not the goal. The goal is to give kids a fun, playful, positive kids yoga experience. And so just kind of being always aware of like, what is the scope of what we're doing? And a lot of times that's communicating to the other adults what is outside of our scope. Like you might have a parent that stays after class and says like, oh, my kid isn't sleeping. And, we've tried this and this isn't working and all of that. And like, yeah, you could sit and list 10 other mindfulness exercises, but there might be something much bigger going on. And so just to sort of say, yeah, these are some tools for it. This is what's maybe worked for me, but like really recommend you talking to your doctor or something like that. That's a hard thing to do sometimes, is to admit the edges of our scope, but it is extremely important and responsible to do so. So those are our stacking stones of teaching kids yoga and teaching kids classes. And we believe in them very strongly. And we'd love to hear if you have something to add on to it, or if you have, you disagree with us, we are down for the discussion. We would love to hear, or if you have something you think we haven't thought of. I know both Erin and I are always open to discussion and to having vibrant conversations with other professionals and community members about the things that we do and care about. So we hope that you enjoyed hearing those stacking stones. But Yeah, so that was fun. That was fun to relive a little
Yeah.
bit of our Meet Me in Child's Pose weekend here on our recording software. Not quite the same as being on a yoga mat together, but it was great. All right, so I have one more question before we kind of start to wrap up. And this is more of a business ended question. So, you've been running your company for 10 years. Woo, that's major. Somebody does not make it 10 years in business or 5 years in business or even 2 years in business if, in addition to being super great at your trade, super great at teaching kids yoga and knowing kids, that you are not also a super excellent business owner. You just can't make it this far in business without having that back end business savvy. And so I'm curious for any listeners who have a passion for working with kids, or they have some sort of expertise, but they're not sure kind of how to turn it into a career. What tips would you give someone who was interested in making that transition from hobby or passion to career to make their business successful? Do you have a tip that you would share with everybody?
Yes. I remember for a long time at the beginning, I would say, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't, right? Like I can always go back to the classroom. I don't have to worry about like, I'm never going to be able to figure this out. But I found a lot of solace in one, trusting myself and eventually getting rid of that. If it works, it works. It's like, it's working. And so let's just trust that this is working, and asking other people for help, right? So like, I don't have a business background. I didn't go to business school. For a long time again, I was like, oh, I'm just a teacher, and taking that just out of it, like being a teacher absolutely made me ready for this, because you wear a million hats in a classroom. And as a business owner, you wear a million hats. And when you don't know an answer, you ask, right? So having people who do have business background experiences. I have a business advisor, so starting to work with somebody more one-on-one, and just not allowing yourself to, it can be very isolating to be doing this, right? And you don't have colleagues the same way you do in a more traditional setting. So finding colleagues. Jamie, you are one of my like top colleagues, right? Like finding ways that you can have coworkers and people that you lean on, that it's not in competition, right? It's in collaboration. And I find that asking for help when you need it, asking the right people for help, or asking somebody who then might know the right person for help, and really basing everything on how can I collaborate, has been kind of my few things that have helped sustain this, and wanting it, right? Like if I got to a point where I didn't want to do this anymore, like that's also important to note. And is it something that you just need to shift or change within your business? Is it that this is no longer serving your life in whatever way? And it's hard. It's really, really hard. And just constantly recognizing like, wow, this is really hard.
Yeah.
And I can do the hard thing. And if I need a good cry, that's okay too.
We got lots of skills for noting our emotions and regulating our nervous system. So
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Well, I
yeah.
love it. I love it.
Yep.
All right. My last question for you, and this is what I ask all my guests at the end of these episodes, is if you could wave a magic wand on behalf of kids in 2025, what would you wish for them, and what messages would you tell them?
That's going to make me cry. Well, I'm about to have a baby. So a lot of this is feeling very close to home. I just wish that our children can feel empowered and safe and seen as whoever they are, and that there is some adult in their lives that makes them feel that way, that they're never alone. And we're in a very bizarre time in our country, and I just hope that children can feel safety somewhere, wherever that is, and whoever that is that makes them feel that way.
I wish that too. I'll co-sign that. Well, thank you, Erin, so much for joining me today and for being in it for youth. Will you tell listeners where they can reach out to you, where they can find out more about BBKY? What's the best way to, hit them with the best contact, and we'll link everything in the show notes.
Absolutely. So our Instagram is at Brain to Belly Kids Yoga, and that's like the word TO. So Brain to Belly Kids Yoga. You can find us on our website at braintobellyyoga.com. We do have a YouTube channel, so that is also Brain to Belly Kids Yoga. And feel free to send us a message on Instagram, and I'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much for having me, Jamie. This was a real treat.
It is always amazing to chat about some of our very favorite things. This topic was right in there, and thank you for sharing your beauty and your expertise and all of your knowledge. I know the listeners will love it. And to the listeners, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Let us know what you thought. Let us know what we should be adding to the Stacking Stones. And we'll be back next time with another inspiring interview. In It for Youth is a Lit Path Studios production. Music is by Inspiring Audio and Pond 5. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And to learn more about this show and all other shows on the network, visit www.litpathstudios.com.